This video was sponsored by World Anvil, the perfect improvised weapon to sling at a squad of 5 to 20 interchangeable faceless goons. Picture, if you will, a familiar scene to those of us versed in the trope space. Our mild-mannered protagonist is walking down a standard-issue dark alleyway when a shape silently emerges from the shadows. Clad all in black and moving with practiced poise, the formidable figure settles into a fighting stance honed in 100,000 hours of training. Our hero faces the sinister Ninja, a deadly assassin unrivaled in skill. And then 6 more of them show up and everyone breathes a sigh of relief. See, everybody knows that while a single ninja is a deadly threat, a group of ninjas is cannon fodder, existing only to attack one at a time and be handily dispatched by our hero with a string of casual kicks and the occasional backhand. This assessment that comes so naturally to those of us versed in fiction may seem confusing and illogical to a viewer grounded in reality, who might theoretically assume that if a single ninja is quite dangerous, then 6 ninjas should be about 6 times as dangerous. Why does giving them backup and strength in numbers make them weaker? This odd phenomenon has been given the name conservation of ninjitsu. It states that each side in a conflict has a set, constant amount of fighting ability, or ninjitsu, to split between its participants. Thus, a one-on-one conflict between 2 ninjas will see a roughly even match, but if one side has 1 ninja and the other side has 20, each enemy ninja will only possess 5% of the fighting ability they'd display if they were fighting alone. Instead, they'll dance around in the background, shadowboxing or doing flips to keep things interesting, while the hero fights their comrades one at a time. While a lone ninja may be able to tank several hits and will potentially continue fighting even while stabbed or on fire, ninjas with the misfortune of being in groups can barely tank a single hit of any strength before flying merrily away and collapsing in a heap. All this serves to produce some very exciting spectacle, but it can leave the audience scratching their heads a little. What causes this strange phenomenon, and why does it afflict everything from ninjas to robots to cops to space wizards? Why does being outnumbered never ever mean anything? Now, the primary problem with this trope is that it breaks the story's internal logic and makes it very difficult for the audience to gauge how much danger our heroes are in at any given time, and what kind of practical threat a fighting force poses. If a single ninja presents a serious obstacle, the audience should be able to assume that, all other things being equal, adding more ninjas will only make the obstacle more difficult to overcome. When the opposite happens, without explanation or justification, it erodes the audience's trust in the story. This is a problem, but it's not an unsolvable problem. There are plenty of stories that justify this kind of threat scaling, improbable as that may seem. But before we unpack how this trope can work, we need to understand why it happens in the first place. Now, there are several reasons why this trope happens, and we can split them into Doyleist and Watsonian explanations, as in reasons that occur because of the writers and reasons that can be justified as happening in story. As far as Doyleist explanations go, the first one is also the simplest. Fight choreography is really hard. Choreographing a fight between 2 characters is already complicated and can become arbitrarily complex depending on individual abilities, the environment they're fighting in, and how creative the choreographer and stunt team are feeling that day. This only becomes more complicated when you add in more people. It's less of a situation of conservation of ninjutsu and more conservation of creativity. The choreographer only has so much they can work with, and if they have to choreograph a team of people rather than one fighter, that attention is going to end up getting split. So in a one-on-one fight, the character might get a lot of focus and show off fancy moves, specific martial art forms, and impressive utilization of the environment. But if you add more people, anything too complicated risks becoming visual noise. Will the audience even notice that the guy in the background is doing a very impressive flip if there's 5 more guys in the foreground also doing flips? All this to say, the process of choreographing a fight is very complicated, and if it's a fight with one character on one side and a squad of interchangeable mooks on the other, the solo fighter is going to get more attention and TLC from the choreographer, and as a result, the mook squad is going to look less skilled and impressive by comparison. They also might seem a lot more fragile, because one really easy way to simplify the choreography is to take characters out of commission, and that means you can thin out the battlefield just by letting your solo fighter one-shot a couple mooks to get them out of the way. Now, this problem isn't a matter of laziness or anything, as it often applies even when the choreographers and stunt people are genuinely giving it their all. A lot of big group combat scenes involve some pretty impressive moves from the background fighters that just end up completely lost because of all the other stuff happening on screen. In fact, in big group combat shots, it's common for background fighters to just be like shadowboxing or wiggling to make sure there's action happening on screen, even if it doesn't actually make sense for them to be doing anything, or if they're way out of range to actually be hitting anyone or getting hit themselves. And even in fight scenes where the background fighters are actually doing stuff, half the time they may as well be shadowboxing because we're too busy focusing on the center of the action to really process what they're doing. It's more important that the scene overall make visual sense to the viewer than that every individual character on screen is being individually impressive. An audience can only visually process so much at a time, and if a large squad of highly trained warriors are all doing complicated things at once, the audience has no chance of seeing all of it, or even most of it. All this contributes to the impression that a squad of mooks does a whole lot of nothing while they wait for the hero to take them out one at a time, because that is is by far the easiest way to choreograph that kind of scene, and every bit of added visual complexity will complicate the viewing experience, potentially to the point of visual incomprehensibility. This is informed by the second reason this happens: the heroes usually need to win. Sometimes protagonists end up in situations they have to lose for the plot to happen. Maybe they need to get captured by the bad guys so they can learn their secret plans, or they need to lose so the bad guys can succeed in doing something evil but much more interesting to watch than whatever the heroes were planning. But the hero or heroes losing is usually kind of a big moment, even if it has to happen for the plot to advance. And a writer doesn't usually want to waste that defeat on a squad of faceless minions. If the hero's gonna lose, it's gonna be to a major named villain with a unique and interesting skill set so the defeat can inform the hero's arc, or maybe just make the fight more visually interesting. Some random interchangeable faceless minion doesn't deserve to do something as important as thwarting the hero. So this means if the hero is facing down a squad of faceless bad guys, it's pretty unlikely the writer is planning on letting them lose. If they wanted a dramatic defeat, they'd bring in someone more interesting. This isn't universal, but it is a pretty common tell for these kinds of fights. So even though our hero is outnumbered and potentially facing bad guys that have given them trouble before, in a very real sense, the threat is a total illusion. The faceless goon squad is here to attack the hero to show the audience and the heroes that the bad guys want the hero stopped, but they're also here to show that the hero can put up a pretty decent fight and is not about to be stopped, at least not this time. So the hero will win, even if they get a little banged up in the process. And all this combines to give the audience the impression that the faceless minions are very little more than plot space filler, and in a real sense, they are. They usually exist because logically they have to exist. An evil emperor needs an army, or they're not really an emperor. An evil boss needs some evil minions to boss around. Stuff like that. The army of faceless goons is implied to exist in the setting because the big bad needs manpower to fulfill their narrative role of subjugating all the hapless background characters. But our heroes are tougher than your average NPC and are above the threat posed by standard issue evil minions, and are really only at subjugation risk by named villains. The army of minions aren't threats at this point, they're set dressing. They help establish a power scale and justify the big bad's threat, but that's really it. Letting a squad of faceless minions actually beat the hero would be like randomly taking them out of commission with the flu, an environmental hazard that we understand exists, but weren't expecting to pose our hero a real threat. And it really seems like there were maybe more interesting and compelling ways to take the hero out of commission than that. So all that to say, conservation of ninjutsu applies because armies of minions are generally used like background set pieces to establish tone rather than posing a legitimate threat, while single bad guys with personalities are actual characters that the writer can use for emotionally impactful interactions without feeling wasteful. And finally, the last oilest reason this trope applies is that it lets the heroes show off all their fancy moves. See, if a squad of faceless minions is basically set dressing, this gives your characters an opportunity to demonstrate their skill by knocking them over in all the fun, exciting ways they can think of. If your heroes only ever fight major bad guys that pose a serious threat or even outclass them, our heroes are going to be too busy trying to survive to show off. This can risk making the hero's abilities a little bit tell don't show, where they're allegedly powerful badasses, but practically all they do is survive by the skin of their teeth. If everyone's running around in an elevated power scale and we never get a chance to compare it to, like, regular people, it's easy to lose sight of what that power means. So sometimes it's good to throw a passel of faceless goons at your heroes and just let them go to town. Line them up so the hero can knock them over however they like. But if the minions don't actually put up a serious fight, then it looks like conservation of ninjutsu, because they're really just there to be knocked over in exciting ways. Bonus points if they're robots, and they so often are, because that means your hero can get extremely brutal without worrying about any pesky no-killing policies or PG-13 ratings. Now, of course, there are ways to do this that don't look like conservation of ninjutsu. If the minions actually put up a serious fight or take more than one hit to actually keep them down, this can let your protagonist show off without making them look like total chumps. But a lot of the time, if the writer knows that they're really just there to let the protagonist show off, they kind of forget to let the minions actually put up a serious fight, and they just kind of stand around gormlessly waiting for them to get whacked. Now, these reasons aren't bad, which might seem weird because this trope isn't great, but it happens as often as it does because it's fed into by all these completely legitimate writing concerns. Fights are difficult to choreograph and an audience can only keep track of so many players at a time. Heroes being defeated is a good opportunity for character drama that probably shouldn't be squandered on non-characters, and it's always a good idea to make sure your audience knows what your characters are actually capable of. This all weaves together to create a large space of scenarios where a large squad of interchangeable bad guys narratively stands no chance against one protagonist, even if logically speaking that shouldn't be true at all. But there are ways to make this work, which brings us to the Watsonian reasons this trope can occur. These are the justifications that exist in story to explain why these fights end up totally one-sided in the opposite direction we'd logically expect them to. The simplest explanation is that there's some trick to beating these bad guys. The first time our hero fights one, they have a lot of trouble because they haven't worked out the trick yet, but later, after they've got the trick down, it becomes pretty trivial to take out even large squads of them. The trick can be almost anything: an elemental weakness, a programming hack, a sound frequency that shorts them out, a specific frequency of light they're visible at, a big glowy weak point to hit hit that shuts them down, whatever. Once our hero knows what it is, they can use it whenever they want, and even potentially take out a whole passel of bad guys at once. This is probably the best justification for conservation of ninjutsu because it genuinely explains why the bad guys seem so much weaker after their first appearance, even though they're showing up in big groups, but it has the downside that the bad guys need some kind of specific exploitable weakness, and that can be tough to justify. Why exactly would the evil Emperor's robot army be vulnerable to AM/FM radio frequencies? Well, because there needs to be some way to mess them up. This does actually give the writer the opportunity to let the bad guys get upgrades that remove old weaknesses and make the heroes actually struggle fighting them again, which can be fun and prevents the fights from getting too samey. In some stories, it's not so much that there's a specific trick to beating the bad guys as it's just that our heroes get better at it with practice because all the bad guys are pretty interchangeable and don't really have all that many new tricks up their sleeve. And the less common Watsonian explanation is that these particular bad guys work best alone and actively struggle to fight in large groups, making them actually less effective in greater numbers. This is trickier to justify because it feels a little counterintuitive and makes us question why they'd fight in groups at all, but for instance, a bad guy who specializes in stealth or really long-range combat might not be so good packed in close with 10 other guys just like him. Like some kind of, say, ninja. Anyway, while this technically works as an explanation, it's a little shaky and unintuitive, so it's not as popular. There are also scenarios that resemble conservation of ninjutsu, but are actually caused by unrelated factors. For instance, if our heroes undergo significant power-ups and become that much stronger in a fairly short period of time, previously deadly threats become very rapidly outclassed and can be wiped out by the dozen quite easily. This isn't the same as the bad guys getting weaker in large numbers, it's correlation, not causation, but it can feel very similar for an audience if the power-up isn't particularly well handled. There are also cases where the characters are faced with an army of bad guys and conclude that they straight up can't fight them hand to hand because, as expected, they'd be destroyed by their superior numbers, and instead they come up with a clever way to solve the army situation without ever having to personally deck anyone, like hijacking the army's leader, taking the army and pushing it somewhere else, or allying with another army so the two armies cancel each other out and the important characters can go back to fighting one-on-one duels like civilized people. This also doesn't indicate that the army is useless, but it does functionally remove it from factoring into the plot, which can feel similar to just making them overtly and inexplicably useless in large numbers. There are also cases where a single bad guy poses the same proportionate threat as a whole squad of the same bad guy later on, but this is because the heroes have more backup, more firepower, and more training. For instance, the jump from alien to aliens involves an escalation from a single xenomorph to a whole hive of the things, but the protagonists of the first movie are a tiny unarmed gang of untrained space miners, and the protagonists of the sequel are a large, heavily kitted out crew of highly trained marines, and they still get shredded. This is a case where conservation of ninjutsu is successfully averted, because each xenomorph in Aliens feels about as deadly as the lone xenomorph in Alien did. Killing one, while possible, is never easy or painless, and they've got the heroes on the defensive pretty much the entire movie. But this is a uniquely effective bit of writing that tries very hard to keep the threat level consistent in-universe. Conservation of ninjutsu is a problem because it breaks the setting's internal logic in favor of the spectacle of a huge bombastic fight scene. But bombastic does not always mean effective. For all the times the heroes of the MCU wrecked shop and kicked ass through a giant army of interchangeable faceless minions, the hero versus Mook fight scenes people remember and talk about most fondly are the bus fight in Shang-Chi and the elevator fight from Winter Soldier, and both for very similar reasons. They pit a ridiculously skilled fighter against a squad of bad guys who actually seem like their numbers pose a threat, and the solo fighter has to actually try to beat them rather than just mowing down a disposable crew of identical bad guys with one punch each. The bus fight slaps hard, but the elevator fight is probably my top pick for fight scenes that avoid conservation of ninjutsu just because it does so much with so little. It's barely 2 minutes, and it's just Captain America versus a half dozen goons in an enclosed environment. We know Captain America could beat any of these guys 1-to-1, which is why Hydra stacks the deck against him every way they can. The blatant unfairness of the situation makes it seem like a genuine struggle, and at every point it's clear what's happening, who's winning, and why. All credit to the choreographers on this one for taking an incredibly simple story beat and turning it into this. Story-wise, the script notes could have easily just been Cap fights the bad guys and wins, but the fight works because of how it feels and how clearly it communicates the abilities of both sides. When Cap gets out of the elevator, it's because he's earned it, and then, rather than attempting to mow down the bigger squad of better armed goons Hydra throws at him, he focuses on escaping because he doesn't think he can win, and neither do we. The elevator fight was enough of a struggle that it convinces us that escaping is the way to go. Sure, plot-wise, these guys only exist to confirm that Hydra's trying to take him out, but America's ass is far too powerful to be spanked that easily, but choreography-wise, the story sells us on the fight and the victory. We don't think Cap could just keep shredding these guys up like tissue paper, and we don't think Cap wins just because he's supposed to win. And that is a feeling that these movies overall struggle with. Eventually I'll run out of tropes I can use Age of Ultron as a good bad example for, but not today. The first first time our heroes fight Ultron, it actually seems like a bit of a struggle, which makes sense. They're not expecting a fight, it's a party. Some of them aren't kitted out for combat, and each of the Stark drones takes a few good hits to knock them out. But even with those setbacks, it's still over pretty quickly. Then Ultron spends the movie upgrading himself and building a massive army of extra robot bodies, which go down in one hit. The final climactic battle of the movie features such hits as Black Widow mowing down Ultrons in a truck, Cap landing on a guy, Hawkeye vaguely waving his bow at them, and Gun. These new upgraded Ultrons are objectively worse than Tony's autonomous drones from the start of the movie. The power of teamwork has no reason to make a handgun work better. Now, to be fair, it's easy to miss this if you're not looking for it with an explicitly cynical eye, but that's not good, is it? That means this fight scene is visual noise. Little details like how exactly are our heroes defeating the killer robots threatening the world seems like the kind of thing you want to highlight, not obscure with big spinning camera shots and quick cuts out the wazoo. When Ultron asks the very reasonable question, "How can you possibly hope to stop me?" and Tony's only answer is "together," that's a cheeky power of friendship wink and a nudge that does absolutely nothing to explain why and how they completely obliterate Ultron's entire army in 2 minutes tops. They don't even use teamwork on any of the drones. They don't have to. They go down too quickly. There's more teamwork and combo moves in the first fight. This is textbook conservation of ninjutsu. There is no in-universe explanation given for why this army of killer robots is an absolute joke compared to the threat the first prototypes posed. Ultron has been building this army specifically to fight the Avengers, and they're not even as good at fighting the Avengers as his first draft was. Our heroes win because the story dictates our heroes must win, and everything that gets us from point A to point B is empty spectacle. This trope is a weird one. It's not a writing decision exactly. It's more of a result of environmental pressures that shape storytelling. In a fictional setting, the power of a character is strongly dependent on their narrative importance. So of course an army of faceless goons is about as effective at shaping the narrative as a stiff breeze or a particularly vehement fart. Of course a single ninja is a deadly threat. Ninjas are cool and unusual, so a lone ninja has to be badass. But once you get too many ninjas, the coolness factor is devalued by inflation. It's an odd duck for sure, and it seems like the #1 way to avoid it is not so much through any trick of the writing, but through really good fight choreography. Which makes sense, because that is kind of how you convince an audience that your hero can kick ass. So, yeah, and thanks again to World Anvil for sponsoring this video. As you may know, World Anvil is a browser-based writing and world-building software designed to help writers, game masters, and creators of all stripes keep their world-building organized and clear while writing and world-building. Along with all the classic features like custom wikis, family trees, custom calendars, and a built-in word processor, World Anvil just rolled out a new feature called Chronicles that allows creators to connect timelines to maps, giving you a clean and simple way to visually represent how your story advances through your world. Chronicles supports multiple timelines and multiple maps, so whether you're playing with alternate timelines, multiple disparate plots running in parallel, or just like subdividing your storytelling into nice convenient boxes, Chronicles has the tools you need. And of course, you can keep the world private if you prefer, but if you want to show off your world in progress and start building your audience early, you can make it public and let people follow along. World Anvil is constantly growing and updating with new features, so if all that sounds useful, check out the link in the description for more details, and if you're interested in an annual membership, you can get 40% off with the promo code Overly Sarcastic.